Hello and welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by tastycheats.com. In this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate how you can create a 3D stacked type composition in Adobe Photoshop. In this video, I will be showing you how to create this composition you see here. If you have CS5 extended and above and wish to take a closer look at this document, you can find this in the downloadable project folder. The link is in the description. Now, as complicated as this artwork may seem, it only took a few stages to achieve this composition. In this video, I will be taking you through these stages to demonstrate how to create this composition, so hopefully after this exercise you will be able to explore further and pursue your own ideas. For this tutorial, I will be using Adobe Photoshop CC. Now, unfortunately, if you are using any version earlier than CS5 Extended, you will not be able to follow along with this tutorial, as the 3D feature only exists in CS5 Extended and above. So, this is the second part of a series where I am introducing you to 3D in Adobe Photoshop. In this video, we are going to jump straight into using the 3D features. Now, if you're new to 3D in Photoshop, I recommend you watch part 1. In part 1, I covered everything you need to know to begin using 3D in Photoshop and showcased some of the workspace changes that occur when using 3D in Photoshop. If you want to watch that video, the link is in the description. If you have watched that video, welcome back. You should now be ready to start creating 3D objects and build your own compositions. Okay, so let's get into it. So here is a template I have created earlier, and you can find this document in the project folder. The link is in the description. Now, before you open this template, be sure to install the fonts. These fonts can be found in the project folder. Now, I have put this document together to speed things up a little so we can get started on the 3D. So this is a A3 document set to 150 dpi, and what I have here is a stack of type. And if we look in the layers panel, we can see we simply have 4 type layers. Each type layer has a different font applied, apart from the word awesome here, which is in the same font but on 2 separate type layers. And for organization's sake, I have structured the layers in the same hierarchy as displayed in the composition. Okay, so we are creating a 3D stacked composition here in Photoshop. So as with any artwork, preparation is going to make the whole process a lot easier. So it helps to plan your composition in 2D before we transform this into 3D. So before I think about 3D, I'm going to create all my type layers first. So I've got my big type on top and the other type under this, roughly how I want it to be structured. Right now, this is a pretty rough idea of what I want to create. Notice how the color of this type is also red. Now, at this stage, it really does not matter what color the type is, as this will all change when we turn these into 3D and apply new materials. Okay, so now we have our type prepared, it's now time to turn this 2D composition into 3D. Now, to control my objects and operate in the 3D environment, I will need to see my 3D and properties panel. I have my panel set up this way. I have my 3D and my properties panel here. I have pulled them out from my main panel stack, so you can clearly see what I'll be doing along the way. So the first thing I'm going to do is come into the layers panel and select the first type layer, the big type on top. Now, with this selected, I can do one of 2 things. I can either come into the 3D panel and select from the options which mode I want to apply, or I can come up to the top menu, click on 3D and choose an option from here. So on this occasion, I'm going to come to the top window, click on 3D and scroll down and select New 3D Extrusion from Selected Layer. And as soon as we click that, we will transform this 2D type layer into a 3D layer, and we will activate the 3D mode. Notice the 3D and properties panel have now come to life. We can see the ground panel grid in the canvas area. We have the secondary view window up here on the left, and now we can see the 3D symbol applied to this layer in the layers panel. Great. So next I'm going to click on the next type layer in the layers panel, and upon click, the 3D mode will be deactivated. So with this layer selected, in the layers panel, I'm going to do the same as before. So I'll come up to the top menu, click on 3D, scroll down and click on New 3D Extrusion from Selected Layer. And again, we will transform this into a 3D layer. Now I'm going to do this to the next two layers until they are all converted into 3D. Though this time, I will select my next type layer, and instead of coming to the top menu and selecting 3D, I'm going to come into the 3D panel, make sure 3D extrusion is checked, and simply click the Create button. So that's another way you can transform the type into 3D. Essentially, this is the same application as before, but it's just a different way to go around it. So go with whichever technique suits you. Finally, I'll do the same to the last layer, select the layer in the Layers panel, come into the 3D panel and hit the Create button. And now all of our type is 3D in the canvas area. Great. Now, if we start to select each 3D type layer in our Layers panel, we will see the ground plane changing on each one. Now, why would that be? Well, this is because each 3D layer here is separate from each other. Currently, these are independent of each other with their own environment and scene criteria. Currently, each shape will not affect the other in terms of shadow and light effects. Notice, if I click on each layer and change the camera view up in the secondary view to front, we can only see that particular object in the secondary view each time they are clicked. Also, if we look in the 3D panel, we can only see the 3D mesh for that selected shape. So what we need to do here is merge these 3D objects together so we can build a single scene where all of these 3D elements exist together. Now we can do this quite simply. In the Layers panel, I will select the top layer, press and hold Shift and select the bottom 3D layer. So with them all selected, I'm going to come to the top menu, click on 3D, scroll down and click on Merge 3D Layers. Now upon click, this will now merge these 3D objects together. And in the Layers panel, this will become a single 3D layer. Now I'm going to double click on the layer name and simply rename this to Type Stack. In the canvas area, we can still select each type object individually. And if we look in the secondary view, now we can see all the type that makes up this one 3D scene. If we come into the 3D panel, we can see now we have all the 3D meshes accessible here also. So now we have all the 3D type elements in the same scene, it's time to start to build our 3D scene. So the first thing I'm going to do is define the size of each 3D object. So I'll select the top type object, and upon click we will see the Axis widget appear in the middle. Now I'm carefully going to move my mouse cursor over the white box in the middle. Now I have to be very careful here to select this and not the other tools. When my mouse cursor changes into the arrows pointing out, I know I have the right one. So I'll click and drag to blow up and scale this object like so, but not too big. I'll click off to deselect and click on the next type object below and change the scale again like so. Once I'm happy, I'll click off to deselect, select the next type object down and again scale up a little. Now this time I want to make an additional tweak. To this type object, I wish to extend the height. So on this occasion, I'll move my mouse over the y-axis and locate the Scale Along Y-axis tool, then click and drag carefully to extend the height. Finally, I'll select the bottom type object and increase the scale until I get something I'm happy with. Once I'm happy with the initial sizes of my type objects, the next thing I'm going to do is organize the type stack, as currently they all appear to be floating. So the first thing I'm going to do is align my bottom type to the ground plane and arrange all the other type objects on top neatly. If I come up to the secondary window and make sure the camera view is set to front, I can clearly see this grey line going across the bottom. First, I need to make sure my bottom type object is sitting on this baseline. With the bottom type object selected in my scene, I can carefully click and drag on the y-axis move tool and move this up or down to sit on the baseline, and I'm going to use the secondary camera window as a reference. Then I'll select the next type object above this, and again move this along the y-axis to place neatly on top of the text below. Again with the next type object above, and finally the top type object. So soon I will have all my types stacked neatly on top of each other like so. Great! So next I'm going to come to the secondary view and change this to right. This is going to give us a side view of our type. Now we can see here the extrusions, the thickness of the extrusions are not the same. Now I'm going to change all the type objects so they are the same. So first I'm going to select all my type objects here in my scene, and I can do this quite easily by coming into the 3D panel and locating all my 3D mesh objects, my 3D objects, and I can find these towards the bottom of my panel. I'll select the top mesh object, press and hold shift and select the bottom mesh object. Now we will select them all and we can see in the canvas area they are all selected. With them all selected, we can come into the properties panel. Here we can see the extrusion depth. I'm just going to grab the handle here and start to drag, and that's going to apply the same extrusion depth to my type. And on this occasion, I'll give it an extrusion depth of around 6. Now, looking in the secondary view window, we can see that these type layers are not aligned with each other. So I'll come up to the control panel, click the Align Horizontal Center button, and click off to deselect the type objects. Nice. So now we have a nice stack of type in various sizes and fonts, though from a 3D point of view, it's looking pretty flat. The next thing I'm going to do is rotate these shape positions on the y-axis. So I'll come and select the top type object in the scene. On the axis widget in the middle, I'm carefully going to move my mouse along the red arrow on the right until I hit the rotate tool. When the mouse is over this, you should see a yellow line appear and the mouse cursor change to a circle. So now I'm going to click and drag and this will rotate along the y-axis. So I'm going to pull this out, though only slightly, to rotate my top layer left, like so. I'll click off to deselect, then select the next type object below. I'll do the same, find the rotate tool on the red arrow, but this time I'm going to rotate the opposite way, to the right. Now this will create a nice contrast of direction and boost the 3D feel. Once I'm happy with that, I'll move down onto the next type element and again rotate this in the other direction, left, until I have something that looks like this. For this composition, I'm going to leave the bottom type below how it is. And if we look in the secondary view, I am still looking in the right view, we can see how the text objects are rotating. So next I'm going to make some further type layer tweaks. Now I want to change the bottom type element. I want to alter the space between the letters here. I want to alter the tracking of the type. So if I click to select this type object and come into the Properties panel, I can click the Edit Source button. Upon click, this will open a separate document with my editable type object. So I'll select the type and change the tracking to 180. I'll deselect my type, click Close and Save, and back in my 3D scene the type has changed. Though now I'll have to grab the X-axis and move this back into position like so. Now that looks like a better support structure for my type above. Okay, so now I'm going to focus on the camera angle. I'm going to try and get a good angle of my 3D scene I am happy with. So I'll click off my type to deselect, and I'll come up to the top control panel and select the zoom camera tool. I'll click and drag my mouse cursor down and that will zoom the camera view out. So I'll zoom out until I have a nice space around my type stack, and that's looking pretty cool. Now, I want to give the impression we are looking up at this text, like it's a huge structure. So I'll change the camera tool to the rotate tool. I'll carefully move my mouse cursor into the top of my canvas area and click and drag up like so. Now be careful, if we drag up too much, we will move the camera below the ground plane. Currently, we can see the ground grid over the text here. For this composition, that's no good. So we need to rotate the camera so it's just above the ground plane. And I'm going to make sure I can see some nice shadow perspective here on the ground plane. So I'll tweak my camera until I have something that looks like this. And that's looking pretty cool. We are looking up at the type stack, we can see the underside of some of the type elements, and we have some interesting shadows going on. Now before we do anything else, I'm going to save this camera angle so we won't lose this. I'm going to come to the bottom left of my workspace and right click on the arrow diagram here and select Save. In the pop-up option, I'm going to name this camera view The View and click OK. So no matter what we do with the camera angle going forward, we will always be able to come back to this one. So I'm almost happy with the layout of my type here, though I want to make the composition more interesting, bold and edgy. So now I'm going to alter the top type element quite drastically. To make this easier, with the rotate camera tool selected in the control panel, I'm going to click and drag down and in from the top right hand corner. This is going to rotate the camera up like so, so now I have a good view from the top. Now if I select the top type object, we can make any necessary changes we want to this. Now this type object contains 2 letters, and currently we can only edit the type object as a whole. But on this occasion, I want to edit these letters individually. So now I'm going to split these letters apart. So with the type object selected, I'm going to come up to the top menu, select 3D, and scroll down and select Split Extrusion. Upon click, we have now separated these 2 letters. Now if I click E and then B, we can now select them as individual objects. If we come to the 3D panel, we can see that now the B and E object has been placed in a group called BE. And if we select this, we can still select the type as a group. But inside the new group, we have the B and the E as a separate mesh object. Excellent. So I'm going to click on the letter B, come into the Properties panel and push back the extrusion depth like so, to around 13. Next, I'm going to change the camera view up in the secondary view window. I'll change this to top, so I'm now looking down from the top. Then I'll click on the E, but this time click on the Z-axis move tool and push this back a little in line with the back of the extrusion of the letter B. And then I'll click and drag and move the pointer on the X-axis to move it closer to the letter B. And I can use the secondary view camera as a reference to do this accurately. Also, if I want to toggle the extrusion depth of E, if I think it's a little large or small here, I can do so. So now we have added a contrast in depth of the letters B and E. Now after this tweak, B and E are too far back. So I'll come into my 3D panel and toggle all my mesh 3D objects so I can see them clearly in the panel. I'll click on the BE group to select them both and just click on the Z-axis move tool and pull them forward like so to position them more neatly on top of my type stack. Now if I come into the 3D panel and click on the camera I previously saved, the view, we will go back to the original view and we can see our composition is coming along. So with both the B and E selected, I'm going to rotate on the Y-axis and then tweak the X-axis move tool until I have something that looks like this. So now that's looking pretty bold and 3D. So now I'm happy with my type composition. Next, I'm going to think about the light on my scene. If I come into the 3D panel and click on the infinite light widget will appear. So here I'm going to click on the widget handle in the canvas area and drag this down. As I do this, you can see the shadows changing dynamically in the scene. So I'll just pull this down a little. With the infinite light still selected, I'll come into the properties panel and tweak the shadow softness and the color intensity until I get an effect I am happy with. And that's looking quite interesting. Some nice shadows cast on my type here. Okay, so up until now, I have been focusing on getting my composition right, tweaking my 3D shapes, finding the right camera angle and adjusting the light. Now I'm going to focus on applying materials to my 3D objects. So I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. So if I come into the 3D panel, I can toggle out all the objects to reveal the mesh materials. So here I can see the materials applied to my letter B. I'm going to select the front inflation material. With this selected, I'm going to come up into the properties panel. Currently, we can see the diffuse color is set to red. I'll click this color box and up will pop a color picker menu. So now I'm going to change the color to a more pinkish red. I could either select a color from the spectrum on the left or type in a color. On this occasion, I'll enter in the RGB values here. I'll enter in 210 for R, 37 on the G, and 155 for B, and click OK. Now, I'm not applying a bevel to this object, so in the 3D panel, I'll skip this material and click on the extrusion material. Now I'm going to do something a little different here. Instead of applying a color, I'm going to load in an image. I'm going to apply an image texture to the extrusion of this shape. So with the extrusion material layer selected in the 3D panel, I'll come up into the properties panel. Now instead of clicking on the diffuse color, I'm going to click on the little folder on the right. Upon click, a little menu will appear. From this, I'm going to select Load Texture. Now I need to locate the image I want to map into the extrusion. So I'll navigate to the Textures folder in the Project folder and select Blue Polygon and click Open. And now we can see the texture has been applied to the extrusion of the object. Cool! So now it's a case of applying the same effects to the next object. So I'll locate the materials layer in the 3D panel. For the letter E, I'll change the front inflation color. I'll enter in the RGB values 210, 37, 155. OK. I'll skip the front bevel material. I'll select the extrusion material and again click on the little folder next to diffuse. Click Load Texture, select the blue polygon, and now the top type is finished. So next I'll carefully select the 3D type object below. Now this time I want to apply a little bevel effect to add to the 3D effect. So with the 3D object selected, I'll come over into the properties panel and I'll click on the cap icon. At the top of the properties panel, third from the left. In the bevel width percentage, I'm going to add a value of 15%. And if I zoom in, you can see I have now applied a small bevel. Okay, so now for the material. For this type object, I want to apply a gold material, and I want to apply this material to all of it. I'll come into the 3D panel and locate the materials for this object. I'll select the top material and press Shift, select the bottom. This will select them all. Here we can see it's currently set to red. Over to the right, there is a little material icon. Just to the right of this is a little tab. If I click this, I can load some extra textures. So from the list, I'm going to select the metal gold texture. Upon click, that will apply the texture to all the materials that make up this 3D object. Pretty cool. Next, I'll come down and select the type object below. This time, I'm going to come over to the properties panel and click the cap tab again. And I'm going to push the bevel width right up to create a nice bold bevel. Next, I'll come into the 3D panel and locate the materials for this object. Just like earlier, I'll select the top material and press Shift, select the bottom. This will select them all. Then up in the properties panel, I'm going to click to see extra materials, but in this case, I'll select the no material. This will set it to a grey-white, and now we can see some nice shadows cast over the bevel there. Looking pretty cool. So moving on to the last type object, I'll select this and locate the materials in the 3D panel. Now for this object, I'm simply going to apply a subtle image texture to the front inflation material. So with the front inflation material selected, I'll come up and click on the little folder icon next to the diffuse color, and this time select the red polygon image, click Open, and there it is. And I'll leave the rest of the materials set to red. So that completes the materials for my 3D type objects. All that's left to do now is create a background. To do this, I'm going to open up the blue polygon texture from my materials folder. I will press Command A to select all, Command C to copy, then Command W to close the document. Back in my new document, I'll press Command V to paste. Now, this will paste the image as a new layer on top of my 3D layer in the Layers panel. I'm going to press Command T to activate 3D Transform, and I'm going to click and drag on the top right corner and drag out while holding Shift and Alt to scale the image up like so. Next, in the Layers panel, I'm going to click and drag this layer behind my 3D layer. Now, I'll be adding some additional layers to this background in future. So with this layer selected in the Layers panel, I'll press Command G, and this will place the new layer into a folder group. I'll double click on the folder name and call this background. Now this background is looking pretty bold here, so I'll change the opacity of this layer to 65%. Currently, this image is interfering with the shadow effects of my type stack. If we look at the finished render, we have this nice feather effect coming up, allowing us to see the shadows nice and clear on the white floor plane. So back in my document, I'm going to come to the background folder in the Layers panel. With the folder selected, I'm going to come to the bottom of the Layers panel and click on the Add Layer Mask button. Upon click, this will add a layer mask to the folder group, and I can see the layer mask thumbnail applied. With the layer mask thumbnail selected in the Layers panel, I'm going to come across to the menu and select the Gradient tool. I'm going to make sure that my foreground color is set to black and my background color is set to white. Next, I'm going to come across into my canvas area and click on the base of the type stack and drag up to the top of the AWE. Now upon release, this will create a nice gradient mask, and now the background blends well in with the white ground plane, and we are able to see the shadows. Nice. Now this blue background is looking a little bland, so I'm going to add some color to this. So I'm going to open up a color blur image, and this can be found in the textures folder, in the project folder. So I'm going to copy this image, and back in my current document, I'm going to click on the blue background layer in the background folder and press Command V to paste. And because we pasted this image into the background folder with the gradient mask layer, we will now apply this mask to the new color image as well. Easy. So with the new color layer selected in the Layers panel, I'm going to come up to the blend mode options, and to this layer I'm going to apply the blending mode color. Now that will cast the colors onto the polygon image in the background, and that's looking a lot more interesting. Now on this layer, I think the color is a little too rich, so I'll change the opacity to 70%, and that's looking more balanced. So that completes the background, and that completes my overall composition. Now, all that's left for me to do is render my 3D layer and save my image. So if I select the 3D layer in the Layers panel and look in the Properties panel, I can now click this Render button. Upon click, Photoshop will begin to render my 3D scene. So after a little while, I will end up with something that looks like this. And lastly, I'm going to save my document to ensure I save my render. So that's how we can create a 3D type stack composition in Adobe Photoshop. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. If you liked the tutorial, hit the like button on my Facebook page. If you'd like to see more videos like this in future, hit the subscribe button. Don't forget, you can download the documents you saw in this tutorial. All links are in the description. Well, that's it for another video, brought to you by tastytunes.com. Thanks for watching, have fun guys, and I'll see you next time.